They met the way so many modern friendships begin, standing on opposite sides of a playground, watching their daughters decide, with the effortless certainty of children, that they would be best friends. Katrina had been there first, perched on a weather-worn bench with a book she wasn't reading. Eve arrived late, slightly breathless, juggling a juice box, a phone, and a child already halfway up the slide. Their eyes met in that silent acknowledgement shared by mothers everywhere. This again, this chaos, this beautiful exhaustion.
Yours?
Katrina asked, nodding toward Eve's daughter. Eve smiled.
Unfortunately, yes.
Katrina laughed, loud and unguarded.
Same.
That was the beginning. Playdates followed, first tentative, then routine. Juice boxes became coffee. Coffee became frozen daiquiris when someone, Eve, it was always Eve, suggested they deserved something stronger. They'd sit at the kitchen island while the girls turned the house into a disaster zone, clinking glasses to survival, to patience, to just making it through the week. They learned each other in pieces. Katrina, impulsive and electric, always chasing something just out of reach. Eve, quieter, observant, holding more than she said. Their lives intertwined not out of effort, but proximity. School pickups, birthday parties, late-night texts about forgotten homework and lost jackets. And then, slowly, life did what it does. The girls grew, interests shifted. One gravitated toward sports, the other toward art. Sleepovers became less frequent, schedules filled. The easy rhythm between Eve and Katrina thinned, not broken, just stretched. Texts became occasional. Calls became rare. There was no fight, no ending, just distance. Until the call.
Hi, I'm in town for the weekend and would love to see your face.
Katrina said, her voice just as Eve remembered, bright, but with something heavier beneath it.
Are you free tonight for a daiquiri or two?
Eve hesitated, glancing at the sequined costume laid across her bed.
I'm heading to a party tonight. Costume thing.
I'll pass on that.
Katrina laughed.
But I can come by, watch you transform.
Come,
Eve said.
I'd like that.
Katrina arrived with no luggage, just a bottle of rum and a hug that lingered a second too long. They slipped back into each other easily, like no time had passed. Eve moved between her closet and vanity, curling hair, brushing glitter across her collarbone. Katrina leaned against the doorway, watching.
So,
Eve said, catching her reflection.
what's new?
Katrina exhaled, slow.
Everything.
It came out in pieces. Katrina's husband had asked her to leave, not a fight, not dramatic, just done. And she had surprised herself by feeling relief more than heartbreak. Eve nodded, quiet.
My turn.
She said after a pause.
He left.
Katrina blinked.
What?
A week ago.
Eve kept applying mascara, steady-handed.
Packed a bag. Said he needed space.
A small laugh.
Space from me, apparently.
Silence settled between them, thick but not uncomfortable. In 45 minutes, between eyeliner and laughter that edged on tears, they caught up on years. The kids, the marriages, the slow erosion neither had fully named until now. And somewhere between the second daiquiri and Eve stepping into a rhinestone-studded bodysuit, Katrina said it.
I could stay.
Eve turned.
What?
For a while. I mean, I don't have to go back. Not right now.
She shrugged, suddenly uncertain.
We could figure things out. Together.
Eve studied her, then smiled.
Yes.
The first weeks felt like something out of a dream neither had dared to articulate before. They called it their Golden Girls era, half joking, wholly committed. They shopped like they were building new lives from scratch, because they were. New furniture, lighter, brighter, bedding that felt like possibility, clothes that didn't belong to the versions of themselves they were leaving behind. They cut their hair, bought plants they swore they'd keep alive, filled the fridge with things they actually liked, There was laughter again, real laughter, the kind that came from nowhere and left them breathless on the kitchen floor. It felt like freedom. And then, as the dust settled, the quiet came. That's when the real work began. They sat at the table night after night, wine bottles half finished, tissues scattered between them. They told the truth, not the polished versions, but the raw ones, the resentments, the compromises, the moments they had ignored their own instincts over and over until they could no longer hear them. Their stories were different in detail, but identical at the core. They had both disappeared in their marriages, and now, slowly, they were finding themselves again. Eve began writing, at first tentatively, then with urgency. Words poured out of her like something long held back. Katrina started house hunting, not for a perfect home, but for her home. They healed in parallel, sometimes together, sometimes apart. They became stronger, clearer, happier. And then, as naturally as she had arrived, Katrina left. Not abruptly, not painfully, just ready.
This isn't an ending.
She said, hugging Eve in the doorway.
It's just the next part.
Eve nodded.
I know.
And she did. The house felt different after Katrina left. Quieter, yes, but not empty. Eve moved through her days with a steadiness she hadn't known before. She wrote every morning. She drank her coffee in silence without feeling lonely. She had built something inside herself that no longer depended on anyone else. So when her husband called, she didn't crumble.
I've been thinking.
He said.
About us. About everything.
She listened.
I want to come back.
He said finally. Eve didn't answer right away. Old Eve would have said yes immediately, out of fear, out of longing, out of habit. But this Eve paused.
Why?
She asked. He stumbled through an answer. Growth, regret, missing her, and she believed him. Not completely, but enough,
Okay.
she said. At first, it felt like a victory. He came back softer, more attentive. They talked more. He listened, really listened. He noticed things, helped, tried. On paper, it was everything she had once wanted, but something felt off. It wasn't him. It was her. She found herself quiet in moments she would have once filled. Not out of fear, but because she was observing, measuring, noticing the subtle ways she was already beginning to bend again, to accommodate, to shrink just slightly, to make the space work. One night, sitting across from him at the dinner table, she felt it clearly, the old pattern, not fully returned, but waiting. She smiled at something he said, nodded, played her part, and felt a sharp, undeniable truth rise in her chest. I have healed too much for this. The realization didn't come with drama, no tears, no anger, just clarity. Later that night, standing alone in the kitchen, she caught her reflection in the dark window. For a moment, she saw both versions of herself, the woman who had once accepted less, and the one who had rebuilt herself from nothing. And she understood. She hadn't taken him back out of weakness. She had taken him back because she believed she was strong enough not to lose herself again. But strength wasn't the same as truth, and the truth was, she already had, just a little. Enough. Eve closed her eyes, exhaled, and let the thought settle fully, without softening it. She had forgiven him. She had healed, and in doing so, she had betrayed the one person she had finally learned to protect, herself. When she opened her eyes, there was no panic, only certainty, and this time she wouldn't ignore it.